The ship drifts where light goes to die, a cathedral of steel and bone adrift upon a sea of black glass. In the nave of its endless spine the air is thin and still, as if silence itself has frozen into a fragile mineral and dusted every ledge, every arch, every saintly effigy with a pale frost. Candles fight the dark with faint, stubborn halos, their flames guttering in the slow breath of ancient vents. Their light trembles across marble walls that have been kissed 1,000 times by incense and shrapnel, by the fingertips of the devout and the claws of war. Each vein in the stone is a memory, each crack a confession. The glow slips over gilded iconography and pools inside the hollows of carved eyes, making the saints look sleepless and watchful and a little afraid. Listen closely, and you will hear the ship's heart, not the groan of engines, they have long since fallen into a wounded hush, but the soft, regular tap of cooling metal, the faint exhalation of burned air, the infinitesimal shift of old chains against older hooks. Between those breaths, another sound rises and falls like a drowned thing trying to remember the shore. Distant voices, thin as threads, pulled tight until they sing. They do not sing for triumph now. They do not sing for honor or for home. They sing because they must, because the note has swallowed them, because sound itself has learned hunger. Once, this nave held a choir that could make warriors weep. Once the legion gathered here in armor that caught the candlelight and scattered it like a constellation made flesh. They stood beneath banners heavy with victories and listened as the first harmonious chord unfurled like a standard on a breeze that did not exist, and in that moment all doubt was a stranger. Their devotion had a shape, a color, a taste. It tasted like iron and incense and the sweetness behind pain, the sweetness that tells the mind there is meaning in the agony. They were artisans of death, and art demanded perfection. They believed perfection belonged to the emperor, a mirror angled toward his light. What else was music but an offering, a way to arrange the chaos of battle into a geometry of praise? But devotion, like a blade, dulls where it is pressed the hardest. The hymns lengthened, the rehearsals deepened. Notes that once lifted souls began to peel skin. The search for the right pitch slipped by increments into a need, then a craving, then a law. And when the law failed to satisfy, it became a wound. No one marks the instant a prayer becomes a scream. The two drink from the same well. Only the echo knows the difference. Look to the stalls where the choristers knelt. Their benches are empty, polished by years of armored knees, their edges blackened by candle soot. Resting there are instruments that have forgotten their names, a harp with strings curled like dead hair, pipes fused by heat into a single blistered mouth, drums whose skins are stitched with a patience that makes the stomach turn. The mallets are missing, the sticks are snapped. A bow lies in two pieces like the broken spine of a saint. Blood has dried in lace-edged patterns across the marble, dark and thin where hands were shaken above it, thick and pebbled where it fell from a height. The stains have a music of their own, a constellation of beats that record an evening when sound and flesh were finally indistinguishable. Walk the aisle and the candles will lean toward you, curious as if hoping for a listener who can forgive. The choir screens are wrapped in torn silks, threads humming as the circulation of the ship shifts temperature by a degree. Those threads remember the old compositions, odes to discipline, to symmetry, to war as ballet and mercy as a perfect cadence. But over the years the verses were corrected and corrected again, each amendment a finger pressing harder against the throat of the song. What began as praise ended as measurement. What began as love ended as proof. There is a smell here that outlives cleansing. Wax and brass and the sour sweetness of antiseptic, scorched insulation, the copper coin of blood, the pepper sting of oils burned to ash. Close your eyes and the odors arrange themselves like chords, layered until the nose becomes another instrument and your breath is an unwilling note. Heat crouches inside the stone, released in slow sighs that make the candle flames bow, rise, bow again. Above the high vault dissolves into shadow. The saints ride the ribs of the ceiling like constellations. And in the cold between them, something older than worship yawns wakefully. The first scream arrives as a rumour, a thread of colour teased through black cloth. It is not loud. Loudness would be mercy. It is precise, placed as carefully as a jeweller sets a gem, aligning with your bones in a way that makes your teeth remember their roots. Another follows, a harmony neither higher nor lower but nearer, turning the shape of your body into an instrument case and opening it. You taste metal. Your eyes water without your consent. It is beautiful in the way lightning is beautiful, a map of where you might have been spared if only the sky had chosen another path. Once, their maestro stood at the foot of the altar, in robes that caught light like a shield. He raised his hands, not a baton, not a blade, and the legion listened as if the future were about to be tuned. He spoke of excellence as a kind of faith, of the emperor as a sound that could be approached by getting closer to silence. He taught them the discipline of the held breath, the courage of the pause. In that pause, men found the space to be more than animals. In that pause, they believed they could be redeemed. Now the maestro's robes are stacked neatly on the altar like folded flags, and beneath them the stone is cracked, as though something beneath tried to rise and failed. They were not monsters then. They are not monsters now. They are what devotion becomes when it is starved of purpose and fed on itself. The choir learned to chase a note beyond the threshold of sense, where words sink and the body must speak for them. Fingers bled and were bound and bled again. Throats swelled and were cooled and swelled again. Ears rang until ringing became the bass line, the ground upon which every other note stood like a tower. The more the music hurt, the more it promised. The more it promised, the more it demanded. In the end, hurt was the only promise it could keep. Listen, the ship's bones reply. Somewhere in the dark, the hull answers the choir with a slow, settling ache like a leviathan turning in its sleep. The void beyond is absolute, a pressureless cathedral of its own, and yet even there the song travels, a tension in the skin of the universe. Comets change their minds around it. Dust spirals are rewritten. In the coldest corners of the cargo decks, where frost writes its name on forgotten crates, rats die with their paws over their ears, and their tiny skulls hold the last clean quiet. There was a time when the legion marched from this nave to war with a steadiness that made banners behave. They returned, spattered with other people's endings, and stood again beneath the organ pipes to offer thanks for being allowed such exquisite labour. Armour rang like bells, helmets steamed, visors lifted and eyes watered in the incense haze, and for a minute the superhuman looked terribly young. In those minutes the ship felt like a city you could imagine growing old in. But perfection does not age, it only cracks, and when it cracks, it does so along the lines of everything you thought you wanted. The agony in their song is not only the agony they cause, it is also the agony of memory, of having known a clean devotion and watching it rot within you while your hands continue the sacred work. The candles know this. Their light is honest, fluttering, irregular, insufficient, and therefore brave. They write small letters of warmth onto a cold text, and the text erases them patiently, line after line. Wax sighs into brass dishes. Wicks drown. Fresh flames lean in to replace the fallen. This is faith at the end of all cleverness. To be small and to shine anyway. Walk farther, and you will find a robe draped over a rail. its hem the colour of old cherries where it kissed the floor during a long note. There is a handprint on the rail beside it, 5 petals of darkened polish. The hand is gone, but its weight remains, and you could believe that the wood remembers the prayer those fingers were making. Let this be enough. Let this be the note that pleases him. Let this be the wound that heals us. The prayer did not fail because it was wrong. It failed because the answer did not come, and the silence between question and answer became a country large enough to conquer them. Now the camera lingers, as if it too is afraid to move. It takes in the broken instruments and the blood and the endless ribs of shadow above, and then it rests on nothing at all, a patch of empty air quivering slightly with heat. In that patch the past still hangs, a thin veil of music not yet finished dissolving. You can see the shape of a bow drawn back, the angle of a jaw set against a high note, the tilt of a head that once believed all beauty was a window to God. Then the veil shreds, and the fragments of sound fall like ash. The screams from the far decks return, softer now like a tide withdrawing down black sand. They leave behind the small secrets of the shoreline, footprints of monks who no longer live, a scattering of beads from a broken rosary, a curl of hair trapped in ambered wax. The ship shivers once, delicately. The candles bow as one and rise, and the silence steps forward again to claim its kingdom. It is not empty, this silence. It is crowded with all that was promised and not delivered, with the bones of vows, with the perfume of burnt offerings that never reached their destination. When the narrator speaks, the voice is a low ember. It tells of a legion that gave every note to the emperor's glory, and of the moment those notes discovered they could sing without him. It tells of the sweetness in suffering and of the worm that lives at its core. It tells you that this choir still sings somewhere in the ship where the light never lands, and that their song has learned to grow teeth. It bids you listen, not to be edified, but to understand the price of asking art to bear more than truth can hold. And then the voice fades, leaving only the soft applause of candle fire in a nave that has forgotten dawn, while beyond the walls the void leans in, patient and incurious, to hear whether the next note will be the one that finally breaks the heart of the world. The past returns like a gold tide rolling over Blackstone, and for a moment the void remembers sunlight. The great crusade unfurls in banners and brass, in the steady thunder of immaculate boots upon deck and dust and shattered temple step. They march beneath a gaze that needs no voice, an imperial sun seen through armor glass, felt in the spine like gravity. Where that gaze falls, men straighten and doubts flee. The air tastes of ozone and incense, hot metal and cold promise. Their armor is the color of victory before it is even earned, polished until the candles of 1,000 chapels can see themselves in it and believe they were worth the wax. Each warrior carries not only a weapon, but an instrument's patience, a craftsman's quiet hunger. The edge of every blade holds a reflection of a world they intend to save by the artisanry of destruction. They call battle a gallery. They make of war a colonnade hung with moments arranged in a sequence of strokes and crescendos, each kill a brush mark laid upon the face of history. When they lift their bolters, when they sweep their swords, they listen for a tone in the heart that says, yes, here is the shape of obedience made perfect. Their litanies are tuned to the rhythm of advance, praise in the controlled breath before the trigger breaks, gratitude in the steadiness of the wrist, devotion in the step that refuses to falter, no matter how the earth under it quakes. The faithful find a stillness inside the storm and call it art. The storm, flattered by the name, decides to live in them. every victory strips a little colour from the world and pins it to their standards. Cities burn in orderly lines, each flame neatly placed where it will do the most good. The smoke rises straight, almost musical, chimneys of black scoring the sky. When the guns stop for a heartbeat, the silence is not empty. It is carved, it is measured, it gleams with the polish of intention. The dead lie arranged by chance, yet even chance seems to understand the need for composition. Across the marble, across the mud, across the ice fields and jungle roots and iron deserts, the memory of these marches dries into a varnish that will not scrub away. The taste of it lingers on the tongue, spent propellant and copper, ashes and sanctified oil, until the mouth forgets what it had called clean. They believe their purpose is divine artistry in motion, glory made with the same exactitude as a psalm. A strike is not merely a strike, it is a note struck true. A breach is not merely a breach, it is the perfect opening of a throat to song. They drill until the body becomes a metronome, until the hand knows the work like a prayer bead knows the thumb that worries it smooth. They practice holding their breath until silence blooms behind the eyes and the universe seems to pause to watch them. When they exhale, cities fall. When they inhale, stars feel a shiver and cannot say why. Perfection is an altar on which they lay offerings hour by hour, discipline, fatigue, blood, names. But pride arrives without ceremony, without a drumbeat to warn the sentries in the mind. It grows like mould in damp stone, a velvet darkness too soft to fear until the pattern beneath it has disappeared. At first it only sweetens the edges of obedience. The voice that speaks devotion begins to hear itself and discovers it has a flavour. The tongue would like more. The mirror of polished armour becomes a second sun wherever they turn. The gaze above them is still there, still weight and mandate, yet something in the chest rotates a half degree until the warmth of that light illuminates not the work, but the worker. In that slight turn, the soul opens a crack fine as a hair in glass. A crack is patient. A crack knows its arithmetic. Perfection, once servant, becomes a prayer with no object but itself. The hymn swells. The silence between verses shortens. The choristers' throats harden like leather and cannot remember softness. The pause, the holy pause, where humility stands barefoot and unarmed, grows narrow and mean, a mere beat to get through on the way to the next demonstration of control. They begin to rehearse themselves even when they sleep. They polish because the act of polishing becomes a trance. They sharpen because the scrape of stone against steel is a music that tells them they exist. The incense thickens. The candles flare and drown, as if the air has decided to learn hunger. Their music changes. The hymns of victory, which once rose like clean banners over the dead, begin to bend at the edges. A chord goes a degree too bright, then too sweet, then too thin, then thinness itself becomes the effect they were seeking all along. They applaud the pain it leaves in the ear, as if pain were a subtlety only the skilled could detect. They speak of resonance, of chasing the pure frequency of devotion, and do not notice when that frequency becomes an ache that lodges under the breastbone and will not leave until it is fed. Where faith stood, pride takes root and flowers. Its petals are mirror shards. Its scent is the sugar of rot. It promises a perfection that will draw the emperor's gaze again and again. It promises that if the note is right, the light will favour them, linger on them, name them blessed among men. They begin to pray to an echo. On the march, they keep time with the same impeccable measure, but now the sound of their steps arrives ahead of them like a judgment. Civilians kneel and weep with gratitude as they always did. Saved is saved, but beneath the weeping a tremor begins, a sense that the saviours are listening for applause between sobs. On the battlefield, their formations achieve movements so exact that the enemy dies with a kind of relief, as if death were the only sentence that could follow such grammar. The survivors lie astonished at how neatly the ruin has been stacked around them, how beautifully the final scene has been dressed. Beauty becomes the alibi of cruelty. Cruelty learns to speak in I ams. In their chapels, the organ pipes bloom with sound that sets dust dancing in chains of light. The old chords, measured, strong, shaped to carry gratitude without spilling, are succeeded by phrases that lilt and dip and possess the throat like fever. They rework the psalms to better suit the timbre of their voices. They adjust the liturgy to accommodate the tempo of their hearts. A pulse of joy becomes a pulse of pride, becomes a pulse of need. Priests honest and tired counsel quiet. Quiet is received like an insult. The faithful do not wish to be told to sit. They wish to be seen standing perfectly. The tone darkens. In the forge bays, where the air is a furnace and sparks float like fireflies too heavy to fly, artificers hammer patterns into armor that catch and hold light in a way that seems almost indecent. In the training halls, the beat of practice strikes becomes a drum whose rhythm is tightened night after night until it resembles not the heartbeat of a man, but the ticking of a trap. In the dormitories, sleep comes late and leaves early because the mind is rehearsing a battlefield that hasn't happened yet, arranging corpses that do not exist into a tableau that will be praised. The very walls learn the new song. The bulkheads carry it along their ribs. The deck plates hum with it. The ship complains in low metal moans when the pitch climbs too high. Their commanders hear the shift. Some call it refinement and encourage it, proud of being present at the birth of an era. Others taste iron in their mouths when the choir sings and cannot say why. Warnings are drafted, edited, softened, shelved. Who dares to caution a legion that wins with such immaculate grace? Who interrupts a masterpiece mid-stroke to ask whether the paint smells wrong? The victories continue, and victories are loud. They drown what they need to drown. Then comes a world where the enemy will not break as expected, where the line holds like a stitched wound refusing to reopen, where the air itself seems to spit their music back at them. The hymns of triumph sound brittle against the hills. The brass tastes sour. The saints on their banners look down with eyes that do not blink. In the long night before the final push, the choir meets and decides the answer is not prayer, but pitch. They go looking for a note that doesn't exist, and because it doesn't, they must invent it. They stretch breath past comfort, past wisdom, into a territory where nerves burn and flesh learns to translate pain into tone. Morning smells of cordite and sanctified oil. The sun climbs reluctant, leaving frost in the shadows where no foot has warmed it. The first chords cut the mist like wire. The advance is flawless, of course it is, and the enemy falters under the old spell, then regains itself, as if death has begun to prefer them imperfect. The choir climbs higher. The music's sweetness curdles, then darkens, then bends into something a human throat should not be able to hold. It is beautiful, and the beauty is a lie that feels like truth when it touches the skin. Men on both sides shudder. Some weep, some vomit. The earth under their boots seems to hum as if a swarm lived inside it. The dirge begins without anyone meaning to. It is simply the hymn extended, the coda that became the body, the victory song that refused to stop and discovered it could drink grief like wine. The cadence slows. The drums are not struck, they fall. The wind carries the high notes away and leaves the low ones to crawl through the trenches like smoke. Someone whispers that the emperor's gaze is elsewhere. Someone else says it does not matter. They can sing enough for two. In their hearts, the roar of self-worship drowns the last quiet places where humility stored its tools. The silence they once guarded like a relic is trampled under marching feet, and the crushed thing gives off a faint odor, like old flowers kept too long behind glass. In the aftermath, as the world cools and the medical tents fill, they stand in ranks and listen to the echo of what they made. It moves between the trees like a wounded animal trying to find the den where it was born. They tell themselves the pitch was true, the form immaculate, the casualties acceptable for art of that magnitude. They do not say, because they do not know how to say, that beauty devoured the prayer and left only the hunger that shaped it. Night comes early. The banners hang heavy. The candles in the chapels burn lower than they did, as if tired of lifting their small light into the same high dark. This is how pride takes root where faith once stood, in the gentle slide of intention toward the self, in the polishing of the mirror until only the polisher remains. This is how perfection becomes a prayer that cannot be answered because it has forgotten who could answer it. And this is how the music shifts, first a tremor, then a tilt, then a fall, until victory's hymn wears the mask of mourning, and no one notices that the mask will not come off. The gallery of their war glows, yes, but the varnish is thick with rot. The frames sweat. The floorboards creak under the weight of admiration. In the far halls of the ship, where the light pools thin and blue, a single note holds too long and tears a little at the edges, and someone smiles at the pain because they have been taught to call the pain divine. It arrives like frost over a chalice, thin, almost beautiful, the first sign of something stolen. There is no thunder, no bolt from the firmament to mark the hour, only the smallest unthreading of warmth from the light, the faintest retreat of gold from the edges of their banners. Candles bow and do not rise as briskly as they did. The ship's heart, once steady as a drum beneath the emperor's gaze, finds a new, uneven rhythm. In the lofted choirs and cold transepts of the cathedral ship, breath hangs like veils and does not know which altar to find. They notice it in the rests first. Silence grows teeth. It chews at the pauses they used to kneel inside, bites through the quiet where humility once stood, lantern in hand. The organ sighs under a gloved touch and yields not a chord, but a grain of sand, a rasp, a smear of static. Somewhere a saint's face blackens by a fraction, as if smoke had licked it in passing. The flames on the altar are clean an hour, then flicker green at the lip of the wick, as if remembering a swamp. The incense is the same, rose and myrrh and sanctified oil, yet it coats the tongue with a film the water cannot wash away. When they sing, the air does not accept the note. It balks, it warps, it returns an echo with a bruise in it. Voices that once braided with effortless grace catch and unspool, each strand bright for a heartbeat and then dulled, as if passing through ash. Their maestro's hand rises steady, patient, a map of old victories inked in fine scars, and the choir answers with discipline, with faith, but also with a trembling they do not confess. The first high tenor finds his mark and feels the resonance slide under him like loose stone. The baritones anchor, and hear the anchor turn to silt. Each singer waits for the emperor's warmth to glance off the note and bless it, and when that warmth does not come, the note tightens in the throat and becomes begging. In the chapels, votive trays collect wax in bitter drifts. The saints' niches smell faintly of damp, as though a fog of centuries has crept in, white and patient, and laid its cool hand on everything that remembered heat. The faithful polish their armor and see, not themselves, but 1,000 pinpricks of light that refuse to join into a halo. They kneel on marble worn thin by generations of armored knees and find the stone colder, the floor farther away. Fear is a small bird, quick and grey, landing uninvited on the ledge of the heart. It pecks, it is not hungry, merely thorough. Whispers replace counsel. The commanders speak softly as if words could shatter, and in their softness disagreements breed like mould in the corners where the sun never falls. Some say the gaze will return if they sing truer, hold the pitch longer, polish the breath against the teeth until it is a blade. Others say the gaze has turned away to test them, and the test is endurance, and endurance is pain learned to the point of purity. A few, the oldest, the humblest, say perhaps silence is the lesson, and those few find their voices left behind when the rest march to rehearsal. The rehearsal halls burn with light and leave nothing warm. Lamps glare, candles gutter. The organ's pipes sweat resin. They tune again and again, turning pegs with fingers that do not shake because discipline holds them, because the idea of failure is a thing too large to let in through the door. Yet every interval wears a shadow, a second sound underneath the first, an undertow that pulls the ear toward a low shore where the waves are heavy and the sand is made of ground bones. They name it interference. They call it drift. They say the hull is tired and the vents are singing. No one says what they know, that the song, their song, the one they gave their throats and sleep to, has been refused. When the emperor turns his gaze away, it is not a movement, but the absence of movement. Not a slammed door, but a corridor that simply lengthens until the end cannot be seen. The candles keep faith, because candles do not know how to betray. They burn until they drown, and that is their liturgy. Men are not candles. Men keep faith until the echo fails them. Then they search the walls for hidden doors. In that searching, drawers are open no hand should open. The choir gathers in a lower bay where the bulkheads sweat with the cold of the void, and where old machines hum in their sleep. There, behind fabric screens and careful words, they draw instruments from cloth that stinks of oil and old prayers. A box with strings that never break, made from something that never lived. A horn that drinks breath and returns not sound, but a pressure you feel along the jawline and in the ache of old wounds. A narrow cylinder of dark glass that begins to sing when touched by flame and refuses to stop until drowned in water. These are not sacral tools. Their edges cut faith the way salt cuts the mouth. Yet fingers learn them quickly, because desperation is a teacher with perfect posture and a voice no one dares interrupt. The first forbidden note is timid, uncertain, ashamed of its own birth, and then it finds a cavity in the air and nests there, and the beam above their heads gives a tired, satisfying creak as if agreeing, this is closer. They practice subharmonics in the hours when the ship sleeps. They bow what cannot be bowed. They breathe at the edge of blacking out, seeking that thin place where colour drains from the world and the body, surrendered to sound, will tell a truth the soul will not. The tones they summon do not ring. They vibrate. They travel along bone rather than through ear. They cross the nave and make the candles sway in a wind that does not exist. Fire leans, listens, guttering with a reverence that is not holy. Fear becomes a ritual object placed carefully at the center of the music, circled, studied, warmed by breath, until it softens enough to be swallowed. Their voices, once clean, take on burr and grit. The handsome cracks that once only appeared at the ends of long campaigns appear sooner, uglier, as if something inside the throat had grown teeth and was learning to chew. They salve and anoint and pray, but the oil smells of rust, and the prayers, when said aloud, sound like memorized maps of lost cities. The maestro asks for the old hymn to calibrate the new technique, and when they oblige, the hymn answers in fragments, as if sung across water. The high notes flicker like candlelight seen through smoke. The low notes crawl like fire through the floor of a theatre where the exits have been barred. They begin to measure their days by the distance between headaches. Faith, once weightless as breath, becomes heavy as wet cloth. Men who never flinched from fire hesitate at silence. It has learned to stare back. Devotion dries to a fine dust that coats the tongue so that even water tastes of thirst. In the refectories, cutlery ticks against plates with metronomic cruelty, the petty percussion of a world thinned to mechanism. Laughter goes out and does not return. Eyes redden. Names fall from memory. The ship smells quietly of decay, a sweet rot beneath the antiseptic, the soft bruise of damp under the paint, and still they seek. They chart the forbidden tones the way navigators chart cold stars, mapping where pain turns to pressure, where pressure turns to vision, where vision turns to a door that will not open and will not go away. Some nights the hull answers, a vast, reluctant cello note that passes through the crew like a collective shiver. Some nights the engines twitch and the lights dim, as if the ship itself has been made to listen too closely. Banners slump. The saints, blackened by imperceptible degrees, lean forward in their niches as if to hear the wrong music better. In a last rehearsal before a campaign, no one will remember kindly. The choir stands beneath lamps that sizzle the dust out of the air. The maestro lifts his hand and does not call the old hymn. He calls the new thing, the narrow thing, the note that pierces. It starts low, a thread pulled from a wound. It climbs with sorrow rather than pride, without ornament, without the polite lies of beauty. The first row sways, the second grips the rail. The third closes eyes and surrenders the rest. The sound burrows. It finds a seam the emperor's silence left in every heart and draws it open with a gentleness more terrible than force. Men weep without knowing they are weeping. Fire gutters, then steadies, as if choosing to consent. When it ends, the air is bruised. The silence that follows is not empty. It is crowded with what has been called. In that silence, each man understands the next step without being told. They will sing this not in chapel, not under saints, not for him. They will carry it into the world that has forgotten their names and make the world remember. They will cut cities along invisible lines drawn by the music of their pain. They will be answered, if not by grace, then by echo. The maestro lowers his hand. The candles spit. The newest of them, a boy by their measure, opens his mouth to pray and nothing comes. The betrayal leaves no mark you can point to. It is a temperature, a color shift, a weight in the jaw. It is the moment a lover's eyes look past you to a window and stay there. It is the last ember winking out in a brazier that still stinks of heat. The legionaries clean their blades until they reflect a heaven that will not look back. They wrap their throats in cloth as if dressing wounds already made. The choir files out through aisles of marble that remember every footstep and will remember these too, because marble is faithful even when men are not. Doors close on lights left burning. Somewhere far in the ship, an old bell rings itself thin and then silent, and in that thinness, something listens that is not a god. When they sing again, it is for the wound and for the door beyond the wound, and for the cold that waits there with a hand held out like kindness. They sing for the shape of their hunger and the measure of their fear. They sing for a perfection no longer interested in being blessed. The notes pierce. They enter and do not leave. The world that hears them will not understand the words. They have no words, but it will understand the pain, because pain is a language without empire. In that language they ask for an answer. In that language an answer comes, soft as rot and sweet as smoke, and the candles, all at once, bow their small heads as if in prayer to something that has finally deigned to listen. The world has no dawn. Clouds, thick as old velvet, have stitched the sky shut, and whatever passes for a sun is only a bruise behind them. Wind drags ash across a plain of broken basalt, and the ash whispers as it moves, the way paper whispers when turned by a tired hand. There is no color here, only a deepening of dark into darker. Where fires burn, they do not illuminate. They mark absence like holes punched in a shroud. Sound becomes the only lantern. It arrives before the warriors do, a pressure on the teeth, a memory in the bones. A low frequency that finds the hollow places in every creature and names them. They come in ranks that do not cast shadows because the night is total. Their armor shows its presence only by the way rain-skinned ash slides from it, shedding as if the dark itself could not keep hold. The choir takes its place on a ridge of cooled glass, and the glass sings under their boots with a thin, brittle grief. Their instruments are the bodies they bring, the throats they have trained, until discipline and pain have become indistinguishable. The maestro stands where a steeple might once have pointed, where faith would have lifted a finger toward heaven. He raises not a baton, but a blade, and the blade knows more about timing than any metronome ever forged. The first note is a wound opened in the air. It does not travel, it blooms. You can feel it unroll along the ribs, pluck at the spine like a harp string, collect in the hollows behind the eyes until tears come without asking permission. Helmets ring as if struck from within. Banner poles tremble against gauntlets that do not tremble. And the standard-bearers adjust their grip with the same denial a dying man gives to a cough that tastes of iron. The enemy line, men who knew darkness and named it home, stiffens. Their mouths move as if answering orders issued from far away, through water. The note rises. The ash lifts in curtains. The blade floats in the maestro's hand, then cuts downward, and the cut is a command the world obeys. What sound cannot persuade, vibration compels. It passes through meat the way cold passes through cheap walls. It rakes nerves that did nothing to deserve it. Joints remember every injury they ever carried. Scars stand up like soldiers answering an old roll call. In the trenches, men press palms to their ears and hear the music more clearly through the bones of their hands. Farther back, horses go to their knees as if remembering prayer. Ammunition cooks in its boxes with patient ticks that do not match the hearts. The ground itself hums. Stones shiver and slide into new positions like teeth adjusting in a jaw, as if the planet would prefer to align with the score. The maestro conducts with economy, the way a knife economizes. Each stroke carves a measure. Each pause is held like a throat gripped shut just short of silence. Around him the choir's mouths open, and what leaves them is not singing as anyone once meant the word, yet it wears singing shape, its sheen, its treacherous promise. Harmonies braid and unbraid, a rope over a pit pulled taut, slackening taut again, and some who listen step forward by reflex, as if invited to cross. Those who step do not arrive. The note takes their balance and then their breath, and the bodies that fall have the courtesy to fall in time. Flame learns to dance to it. Watch the pyres, watch how the tongues of fire blew at their cores and yellowed at the fringe like the teeth of old saints begin to sway when the low register gathers its weight. Sparks lift, hold, descend, as if bound by choreography. Smoke pretends to be a veil until the tenors climb, and then it becomes a wall against which nothing casts a silhouette. The smell is a cathedral of its own, propellant, hot oil, wet wool, the tannic sting of blood too new to be ashamed of itself, the sweet rot that finds any battlefield within the hour and names it home. Fear moves through the ranks like a tide, finding a ribcage to fill. It is not hysteria. It is knowledge. The first scream is accidental. The second is not. The third learns to place itself between the notes. And after that the distinction dissolves. Men die as they always have, confused, resisting, reaching for what they were told would save them, but now their voices are collected, measured, tuned. The maestro's blade lifts, turns, and every turn gathers pain like a harvest. The choir listens to the suffering and makes room for it, the way a seasoned singer makes room for a partner to breathe. Soon the screams are not interruptions but instrumentation, a section of the orchestra one did not expect to admire. The music fattens on them. The music becomes them. From the ridge, the camera looks across the field and finds choreography where there should be only chaos. A warrior with half his visor slagged in glossy tears continues his advance with a precision that borders on pity. Another ribs a ruin beneath cracked ceramite, pivots as if on a stage mark and completes the arc of a strike whose end he will not see. A third, struck dumb by a pressure wave that turned his tongue to a numb animal in his mouth, claps out the beat on a drum he no longer holds. They are mutilated and graceful, broken and obedient to a rhythm deeper than mercy. The ash settles on them like powdered incense, and when they move, it lifts in sighs. Silence, once a sanctuary, becomes the narrow path between blades. When the choir withholds sound for the span of a heartbeat, the world reveals how much of itself it has lost. You can hear banners tearing because the air will not carry them any further. You can hear embers contracting, 1,000 tiny glass bells chiming for an audience already leaving. You can hear men praying because prayer survives everything except an answer. Words spill out that have not been spoken since childhood, syllables worn smooth by being trusted. The withheld beat returns, and those prayers become echoes with faces. Faith does not die here, it molts. Some kneel where they stand, not to beg deliverance, but to offer themselves as better instruments. They take the note into their throats and try to match it, to harmonize, to please, because pleasing is a habit, and habits are strong. Their voices break and keep breaking. What emerges from the ruin of the voice is raw and honest and terrible. The choir lets them in. Each new voice is a plank added to a bridge that leads nowhere merciful, and yet the urge to cross is irresistible. The world that hears chooses, as worlds do. It chooses the stronger will. Tonight, will has learned to sing. The maestro's blade grows heavy with condensation, breath, mist, the fine spray that rises from men who persist beyond reason. He rests it on his shoulder the way a conductor rests his baton against his sleeve, as if to feel the tempo in the bone. His free hand marks a diminuendo the way a knife marks grain, and the sea of sound obeys, thinning to a wire that slices rather than bludgeons. It parts ranks. It parts courage. It parts certainty from flesh and lets it fall ringing to the ground, a coin spent in a market that sells only sorrow. In the lull fires gutter, reconsider, and then flare, as if insulted. There are moments when the music forgets to be a weapon and remembers to be art. A chord resolves in a way that should be impossible after so much ruin, settling with a mercy that is not forgiveness but comprehension. For the breadth of a sigh the field is almost beautiful, embers wheeling like slow stars, ash spiraling in patterns that recall old mosaics, mail and plate turning every small light into a map of constellations that do not exist. Then the bass resumes, a tectonic groan you feel in the heel more than the ear, and beauty collapses back into function. The function is to break. Decay works quickly where the air is dense with heat and breath. Leather curls, linen smokes, and then remembers it was once flax that dreamt of sun. The dead cool with a patience that feels like accusation. The living cool more slowly, steam venting from seals, from joints, from the mouths of men who refuse to believe they have mouths. The choir does not tire. They have trained exhaustion to sit and stay. Their voices roughen, yes, but roughness is texture, and texture holds light. They use it. They spend everything that used to be held back for dawn, and since this world will not have a dawn, nothing is wasted. By now the enemy sings too. They do not know they sing. The noises they make align despite intention, the way flocking birds draw geometry against a winter sky. Staggered breaths create a counter-rhythm. The clatter of dropped weapons becomes a rain stick poured from the clouds. The distant collapse of an emplacement enters like a drum that has learned humility. Together these sounds follow the choir the way a shadow follows a torch across a wall. Together they enlarge the thing until the dark has no room left for anything but it. Listen afar, farther than this valley, farther than this night. In the high, thin places where the storm cannot climb, stars feel a tremor, as if the fabric that cradles them has been plucked by an unseen finger. Ships in translation twitch in their tunnels and report echoes no equation predicts. In temples where lamps never go out, flame bows once without wind and rises perplexed. The note has become larger than its makers. It has learned the galaxy's grammar. It speaks in the tense reserved for catastrophe and prayer. When at last the maestro lowers his blade, it is not an ending, but a breath taken to avoid drowning. The field vibrates in memory of the sound for long seconds after the sound is gone, as the skin remembers a touch and refuses to be persuaded otherwise. The choir stands with their mouths closed and their throats burning, and the world beneath them rearranges itself into poses more appropriate to defeat. Ash falls with the serenity of snowfall. Fire quiets to a red conversation among coals. Somewhere in that quiet, a single voice continues, damaged beyond music, and the choir lets it, because it is honest, and because honesty, however hideous, has always been the point. No one claims victory. Victory requires witnesses who can tell the story, and stories require a light that this world has forgotten to keep. What remains is a lesson engraved in pressure and pitch, that art, divorced from purpose, becomes weight, and weight, applied long enough, sinks anything that floats. The galaxy, which did not ask to be audience, will remember the shiver. Planets will not know why their tides were strange. Comets will not confess why their tails bent infinitesimally the wrong way. Somewhere, a child will wake from a dream of humming stone and cry until morning that will not come. The choir turns away, not triumphant, but thorough. Their footsteps find the previous rhythm, the march that used to mean salvation, and for a moment the habit of old faith hangs around them like steam around cooling steel. Then it thins. Then it is gone. They descend the ridge as the blade's last drop of condensation falls and hisses on a coal, a minor sound in a night that has heard too many majors. Behind them, the world without light continues to hold its breath in case the song remembers something it forgot to destroy and decides to return. They learn to live with the aftertaste. It coats the tongue like ash mixed with honey, a sweetness that was never meant for mouths, a grit that grinds between the teeth even when there is nothing left to chew. In the practice vaults, in the ruined chapels, in the cargo bays strung with cables that sweat in the heat, they chase the note that once promised transcendence and now promises only itself. Lamps hum. Incense burns to a black crust along the dish. The ship listens the way a wounded animal listens, one ear turned toward danger, too tired to flee and too stubborn to fall. The line between pain and pleasure thins until it feels like the edge of a blade under the lip of the skin. What once flayed now relieves. What once soothed now stings. A singer holds breath until the room swims and discovers the soft blue before black is where the harmony sits waiting, hands folded like a patient surgeon. Another forces the voice through scar and salt and hears a purity hidden inside the rasp, a light trapped in the smoke. The maestro draws a slow arc with his blade, and the choir follows the curve like a constellation being taught the name of its shape. They swallow fire by inches. They call it technique. Sound acquires weight. It comes off the walls in sheets, in ribbons, in cords knotted and unknotting themselves through flesh. The base is a floor, spreading beneath their feet, steady as a promise. The higher registers are coals lifted by iron tongues and pressed against the sense until the sense accepts the brand as a blessing. Eyes half closed, they learn to walk the inner corridors where nerves open into rooms and rooms open into vaults piled with old prayers. Fear becomes furniture. Faith becomes air, breathed, used, invisible, taken for granted until it runs out. Silence is a predator now. It stalks the edges of rehearsal, crouching in the rests, polite at first, then bold enough to stand in the center and look them in the face. They defend themselves with sound. They hold notes over the void the way a bridge is thrown over a ravine, too narrow to carry anything heavy, just enough to keep a man from looking down. In those held seconds, candles stretch their flames like aching bodies, and the oxygen goes thin. There is a taste to it, thin copper, burned sugar, the citrus sting of nerves rubbed raw. When the note releases, the choir gasps like one animal, and the gasp is music too. Fire has opinions now. It leans to reward a phrase and spits to punish a cowardly cadence. Wax collapses in quiet avalanches that keep time with heartbeat and drumbeat alike. Smoke reads the score in advance and drifts towards the bars where the agony will be sweetest. In the mess, late watches eat in a hush, broken only by the small steel crunch of cutlery and the whisper of steam from cups. In their throats it is always rehearsal. Food tastes of cord. Water carries the echo of brass. They wake with tongues coated in silence and scrub them clean with singing. Faces tell the truth the mouth cannot afford to confess. Brows smooth with a serenity that looks like piety and is only exhaustion learning its mask. Lips tremble and then hold, a compromise struck between the demand for control and the body's insistence on shudder. Eyes glaze as if with devotion, and in their glaze you see reflection rather than vision. The gleam of lamps, the tiny red constellations of indicator lights, the steady ember of a brazier that has forgotten what logs fed it. Rapture and torment become twins no one bothers to tell apart. When a voice cracks, half the choir flinches in sympathy. The other half smiles in relief. The crack is a door. Doors are useful. The maestro is economical with grace and prodigal with rigor. He measures each throat's ruin with the same patience a scribe gives to copying law. His blade keeps time because bone understands bone. Where the baton would have asked, the blade insists, and insistence is mercy in a house that worships a perfection which never negotiates. He knows what the voice will become if it is trained to suffer elegantly. A lacquered instrument that takes all stains and calls them patina. He gives them that lacquer with one hand and strips it with the other. Beauty without scar is a lie. Scar without beauty is a sermon no one will stay to hear. They practice until dreams have footnotes. They wake to the phantom pressure of harmonies resting on the chest like sleeping animals, heavy enough to ache, soft enough to miss when they roll away. In the long corridors, the ship's ribs answer practice with creaks that are not complaints, but companionship. In the bays, machines idle and purr, the big magnetic lungs pulling breath through the vessel, and the choir sinks to that breath until man and engine draft one another into the same hymn. The air grows damp, then dry, then damp again, as if the atmosphere itself is learning to sweat. Every chord burns brighter because it is burning something. The cost is paid at the edge of perception, where the first warning is a brightness behind the eyes and the second is a tremor in the jaw. The third is the smile that arrives uninvited when the note slides like a heated needle under the nail. They catalogue these signs and call them milestones, and milestones are how pilgrims forgive the blisters that keep them honest. A tenor finds a ribbon of sound thin as a hair and pulls until it slices. When the blood runs, his partner notates the pitch. A contralto drops through a trap door under the ribcage and lands on a plank that should not hold. When it does, the maestro rewrites the cadence to include falling. Screams acquire facets. The raw mineral of pain is cut and placed where it will catch light. Some are thin, like glass under stress. Some are thick, amber, and slow, holding flies. There are screams for tearing and screams for pressure, and the rare, valuable screams that arrive as laughter does when a joke lands too well. Helpless, surprised, more honest than the one who gives them meant to be. They are not collected out of cruelty so much as out of poverty. Beauty is expensive now, and the currency that buys it smells of iron. The choir pays without counting. They have no pockets left. Fear is no longer a warded thing pushed to the threshold with charms. It is a guest with a chair at the table and a place in the text. It keeps time, a tick at the teeth, a knock in the hollow of the throat, the soft footfall of doubt pacing the balcony where the chorus used to stand to applaud itself. What it wants, it takes: sleep, ease, appetite. And what it leaves behind is focus so absolute it resembles love. They learn the trick of it. If you stare through fear long enough, it turns transparent and lets you see the abyss behind. The abyss is polite. It asks for little. It offers everything. Faith thins like gold, beaten into leaf and hammered past usefulness. It still gilds, but touch it, and it lifts on your fingertip, fragile, shining, insubstantial as forgiveness in a city at war. They keep their litanies out of loyalty to the mouths that taught them. They shape the words carefully and send them up with smoke that understands the ceiling better than the sky. In the answered silence that returns, they teach themselves not to expect. Expectation is a bridge that collapses under art's weight. Better to build piers and step from one to the next. Eyes on the next stone, the next breath, the next note. Decay works its will kindly. Leather straps soften, then give. Strings accept oil until they drink too much and slough their tune. The varnish on holy wood grins with hairline cracks that map out a geography older than pilgrimage. In the galleries of their memories, paintings darken. Faces once beloved retreat into shadow, leaving only the whites of eyes and the glint of teeth that were never smiles. In the sleeping racks, the smell of men who have learned to burn from the inside settles into blankets that will keep warmth like secrets and refuse to return it. The ship is a body that has caught their fever, and still there is light. It gathers in filaments along the edges of things, in the silver thread where a seam was mended, in the clean knife glint along a crack in the floor, in the halo that clings to breath when torches burn low. This light does not comfort, it clarifies. It outlines the extent of damage the way chalk outlines a shadow at noon. When they sing into it, the light seems to answer, thinning or thickening according to the frequency, as if the spectrum itself has properties that can be tuned. They make of illumination just another register to play. The boundary that once protected them from themselves blurs, then erases. A man forgets his given name and answers to a pitch. Another ceases to understand left from right, front from back. Orientation is replaced by alignment, and alignment is determined by the nearest resonance. Injury becomes instruction. A split lip makes a new vowel. A cracked rib teaches the body when not to breathe, until not breathing becomes the key to sustaining impossible lines. They are in love with what they are making and cannot see what it is unmaking to feed them. The maestro, too, is consumed. He pretends differently, straight shoulders, steady blade, voice like a road well kept, but his hands tell the tale when they shake after the final cut, when he touches the hilt to the warm cheek as if to ground himself, when he lingers at the rail after dismissal, listening to the echo disentangle itself from the air like a lover dressing slowly not to be seen leaving. He knows they have crossed a line that cannot be crossed backward. He knows, and he keeps time anyway. There is a cost to refusing a god once you have built it and taught it to sing. At the end of a day that had no morning and promises no night, they rest without resting. Throats wrapped, chests banded, tongues cooled with melt shaved from pipes that sweat and taste of iron, they lie in rows like the inside of a cord. The ship breathes over them. Each inhale is a hush. Each exhale is a draught that moves the hanging lamps. The silence that finds them is not the hunting silence. It is the silence of a cathedral after the congregation has left, full, resonant, alive with what was invoked and will not be dismissed. Into that silence the last voice, always one more, rises half asleep and offers a single note, so thin it could be a crack in glass. It holds, it brightens, it hurts, it heals nothing. It completes everything. By morning, if morning were possible, the music has eaten more than hours. It has consumed the softened places where memory kept the world kind. It has consumed the scaffolds that lifted prayer above want. It has consumed the space in the chest where fear could be stored without being fed. Body, mind, faith. None burned all at once, none left untouched. They stand again because standing is the law that remains, and when the maestro lifts the blade, the choir's mouths open like doors on hinges, polished down to brightness by 1,000 desperate hands. The first breath tastes of metal and smoke and the faintest sweetness, as if the air itself has learned to be an offering. And in that breath the perfect note waits, patient as frost on a chalice, inviting as a wound already named beautiful. They drift where maps unravel and distance forgets its own arithmetic, a cathedral without doors eased into the ink between stars. The hull is a husk, polished by nothing but time, pocked with the soft wounds of dust that travels like a patient ocean. No beacon burns. No engines preach their iron gospel. Only the ship's old bones speak in settling murmurs, answered by the colder murmur of the void, and within that double hush their choir remains, unmoored, uncounted, a congregation of throats that learn to outlive breath. When they sing now, their voices do not carry so much as they divide, threading themselves through seams in reality like light through cracked glass, every filament straining in a different direction and never breaking free. There is no audience. The universe has already stood and left. Worlds that might have listened sleep under their own weather. Cities rinse their streets in morning rain that will never remember this sound. And temples keep small fires that do not lean, not even once, toward the black. The maestro is gone, blade and hand and the careful sternness that pretended to be love, gone as heat is gone from cooled iron, traceable only in the way the metal resists a new shape. The choir has learned to keep time without him. Time answers by becoming a circle, a corridor that returns to its own doors endlessly, every footfall landing on a stone that remembers the previous footfall perfectly. They sing because silence has become a predator in these halls, a thing with slow breath and patient claws. When it settles on the deck, you can see frost pearl along the lip of old brass, hear the tiny glassy cry of it forming and cracking and forming again. The singers hold a note, and the frost retreats as a tide retreats from a hot rock, hissing in a language that refuses to be translated. They hold that note a heartbeat longer than they should and learn, again where pleasure bleeds into pain, and how pain, faithful as a saint and twice as tireless, refuses to release the hand that took it. Light exists here, but it is not generous. It arrives bent, refracted through the ship's stained glass saints and the blunt arithmetic of distance, washed to the pallor of old parchment. When a torch is struck, the flame shivers as if surprised to find work still being asked of it. Smoke rises and cannot decide whether to lift or sag. It hangs, a grey ribbon suspended in a church that forgot the sky. The taste of the air is metal and dust and the faint, medicinal sweetness of oils absorbed long ago into wood and skin. Everything smells of things that used to burn. Between dimensions, their voices are threshed into strands too fine to hear with ears. You feel them instead, at the hinge of the jaw, along the rack of the spine, in the scar that should have healed and never did. Each filament is a memory that refused burial, a chapel's echo at the hour before dawn, a banner lifting in an obedient wind. The first pure pitch that convinced a young throat it had a purpose. The strands braid themselves into ropes, and the ropes chafe through nothing, binding nothing, the work of binding more important than the idea of what might be held. Faith persists like this, a habit the hands remember after the mind has found a way to leave the room, artifice remains. The old instruments lie where hands arranged them for repair that never came. Strings slack as discarded vows, pipes dimmed to pewter by the breath they were made to carry, drums with skins puckered and caving like the faces of saints who waited too long for a miracle and turned to regard their own patience with pity. The choir's bodies mimic these objects, flesh remembering the geometry of a bow stroke, ribs becoming a resonant cavity any note can own. When they inhale, it sounds like rust smoothing. When they exhale, a cinder rolls somewhere under the deck and finds a cooler place to die. Fire is a rumour now, and rumours have their own physics. Far outside, a star sheds its skin in slow layers, each layer a faint, bright pulse that takes centuries to travel and only seconds to confess itself spent against this black hull. The pulses touch the choir like distant hands, too late, too gentle, and draw no thanks. Nearer, in the nave where candles were once an answer and not a question, a single wick will sometimes catch for no reason the engineers can explain. The little flame bows, recovers, bows again, as if in conversation with something no one can see. The singers never approach it. They honor it with distance, the way you honor a grave that holds the wrong name. Fear changes shape here. It is not the swift animal that once paced the lip of battle. It is sediment, fine as ash, settling in corners the brooms can't reach, collecting along eyelids until the eyes blink slower, heavier, as if to carry the weight more carefully. It informs their pitch the way salt informs the sea, subtly, absolutely. They place notes the way divers place hands along a wreck, recognizing by touch what will bear weight and what will shear away at a careless tug. In those precise placements there is devotion, yes, and also a craftsman's despair, all the right motions performed for a god that has chosen to forget motion entirely. Faith, stripped of petition, becomes description. They do not ask for deliverance. They record a weather of the soul. This is how the silence sounded at third watch. This is how the light failed at the third lamp from the door. This is how the air thinned when we named our dead and the names did not arrive. The documentary of their survival is scored in tones that bruise the blood and brighten the teeth, each bar a ledger entry. Suffering balanced against song, song balanced against the sweet. Stupid hope that if the ledger is neat enough. The bookkeeper will lift his eyes. Art severed from purpose opens like a flower grown under stone, pale, exquisite, malign. The petals are perfect. The scent is hunger. It teaches you to admire the pattern and ignore the soil. That is the horror the narrator names at last. Voice low as banked coals. Words slow so they will not crack on their way out. This music, which could once lift men from themselves towards something cleaner, has learned only to describe the prison. It tells the bars apart with accuracy. It praises the echo's fidelity. It finds clever ways to say there is no door. And still it is beautiful. And that is the problem that eats the heart from within. Decay attends them like a physician with infinite time. Leather softens, then weeps, then powders itself into the air, to be breathed and sung. Varnish lifts in flakes the size of fingernails and drifts like brown snow down into the mouths of men who sleep with their lips parted, trusting habit more than reason. The saints' painted eyes sink a fraction deeper in their sockets each year, or the light finds them differently, or time has simply taught the choir how to see without lying. In storage bays where wheat once dreamed itself into bread for the faithful, dust rises at a footstep and settles again, satisfied. The ship is learning to be a tomb with dignity. They drift through regions where sound has no right to live and make of that wrongness a home. Sometimes a signal brushes them, military code so old it belongs to another species of grief, or a prayer launched from a planet that no longer recalls its own name, and their music bends toward it like grass toward water. The signals pass. Their bending remains. The echo learns the outlines of every shape it has ever touched and keeps them as a miser keeps coins rubbed smooth. There is no poverty worse than this wealth. At the end, if a circle can be said to have an end, the camera finds the nave again. It is smaller than memory had sworn, and larger than any mouth can say. A single note has been left burning on the altar, as a coal is left in a winter hearth. Too mean to heat the room, too stubborn to die. It shivers there, very narrow, very clean, the tremor of it visible in the air like a wire pulled tight by invisible hands. The singers stand far back, shadows refusing to lengthen, as if any motion might jostle the filament and break it. Their faces are not rapt, not tormented, only attentive, the way a condemned man is attentive to the law, reading itself aloud. Listen to how it thins. First, it loses weight at the edges, a silk scarf drawn through a ring. Then it loses temperature, the warmth draining until what remains is shining but cold, like moonlight on a blade that has forgotten the last hand it served. Then it loses memory, shedding overtones like leaves until the line is bare enough to be mistaken for purity. Purity is only emptiness arranged with taste. The note learns this and trembles, ashamed and proud in the same instant. And in that tremble all their history is present. Banners in righteous wind, chapels lit for victory, the first forbidden pitch that made the candles bow. The world without dawn, the maestro's blade marking time. The moment art became appetite and appetite began to starve. The silence that waits for it is worse than death because death is an event, an answer, a door that opens onto something even if that something is only the knowledge of a locked room. This silence is a surface that reflects nothing, accepts nothing, changes for nothing. It will take the note and leave no fingerprint where it touched. The flame on the altar bows once more, and even that courtesy seems extravagant. Somewhere deep in the ship, a bell that hasn't rung in years remembers how and gives a single, thin cry like glass cooling too quickly. The note flickers, regathers itself, as a soldier regathers his grip on a flag that has been trying to fly away. It holds, it fails. It holds again, then it fades. Not down, but out, its edges walking backward into the dark until there is no center left to defend. The singers do not follow. They have become custodians of endings and know the difference between mercy and interference. The camera does the simplest, hardest thing it can do. It stays. It watches the last visible shiver unthread. The air relax as if a fist unclenched. The wick's small ember nod into ash. In that exact breath where sound is not yet gone and silence is not yet king, the narrator speaks, a voice scraped down to truth. Art, severed from purpose, becomes horror. The black takes the screen like a closing eye. In it, a last whisper moves, too quiet to disturb the dust, quick as a knife drawn across cloth. They sang for perfection and found damnation.